The House settlement. It is fantastic news for Penn State.
You are Locked On Nittany Lions, your daily podcast on the Penn State Nittany Lions. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
You are locked on to Penn State football and the business of college athletics. And thank you so much for making Locked On Nittany Lions your first listen and watch every single day. My name is Seyko, and I'm your host of the show, credential media member for both Penn State football and wrestling. He is the voice of Penn State football, Steve Jones. So the expertise from Penn State football is going to carry over into this House settlement, NIL, and the issues with potential in private equity. Today's show is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. So there was a report that wasn't correct. Pat Kraft said that there is no private equity agreement with Penn State. So we're going to talk about the issues with that. The House settlement, now that it's officially it's in effect, is it good for Penn State? It's good for Penn State, but it might be bad for college athletics. So, Steve, now that the House settlement is actually in place, this is, for Penn State, it gives them a competitive advantage because of what Pat Kraft has done for the athletic department, the brand that Penn State is. So, yeah, this is something that's extremely going to be beneficial for the Nittany Lions and how they promote football, but basketball, wrestling, all 30-plus varsity sports.
Well, this should have been done decades ago by the NCAA. I'll give you an example, Zach. When the Olympics allowed professionals into 1992, including the Dream Team in Barcelona, when the Olympic movement gave up on amateurism, that's when the NCAA should have been transitioning out of amateurism. And the fact that they kept delaying it and delaying it has now brought the chaos of today. And has brought the chaos of the last few years. If they had handled this issue sooner, this would not be as chaotic right now as it's been the last few years. And really, it falls on them. And ask yourself why the term student athlete exists. Well, the term student athlete exists is because it's legalese. That's how, they're students and they're athletes, and that's how they got around paying them. So now they're going to get paid. They're going to get paid internally. And essentially what's happening here is that you'll always need outside donations to make a difference. And the Penn State football team this year, for example, I talked to a group back at the end of March, beginning of April. And the opening question I asked was, how many of you pine for the old days when players stayed 4 years? Every hand in the room went up. And I said, well, because of donations and what has been known as NIL, Drew Aller, Katron Allen, Nicholas Singleton, Drew Shelton, Nick Dawkins, Venga Ioane, Khalil Dinkins, Zane Durant, Denai Dennis Suttons, and Key Wheatley. I said, they're all back for their fourth year. I said, you got your wish. All right. And that's, and roster retention, especially in a developmental program like Penn State, is critical. And because of money and the personality of the players, their roster retention this year is among the best in the country, especially when you consider the quality of the player that they were able to retain, the quality of experience of the player they were able to retain. And that is a big part of it. People will look at a Caleb Downs and how much money he got to move from Alabama to Ohio State and what a difference he made for Ohio State, or a Will Howard going from Kansas State to Ohio State last year. But the vast majority of that roster was retained. Travion Henderson stayed, Emeka Ibuka stayed, Jack Sawyer stayed, JT Tuiamalo stayed. Denzel Burke stayed, and that's because of roster retention. The best programs have had roster retention money available. And that's going to be critical with this, as of the $20.5 million, roughly 75%, could be as high as 80, 75% will probably go to football. Yeah. 10 to 15% will probably go to men's basketball. 5% women's basketball, somewhere in that range, and the rest to other sports as necessary. And we'll see how it plays out. Look, there are going to be lawsuits around this.
Yeah.
Okay. there's already a Title IX suit that has been put forward by the Oregon women's beach volleyball team and also the Oregon club rowing team. I don't know what the club rowing team is looking for, but those suits are now working their way through the Oregon courts.
Yeah.
You're going to have a challenge, I'm sure, when it comes to the clearinghouse that Deloitte will be running.
Yes, for NIL.
I'm sure that there'll be something that happens with that. There'll probably be a suit as to why it's capped at $20.5 million. And all of these questions you can answer if Congress does get involved and at least grants some form of antitrust exemption to the NCAA, which then gives them the ability to negotiate a collective bargaining agreement, because I think you're going to need that moving forward with the money and the dollars we're talking about.
One of the other issues with this House settlement was particularly for football, was the roster cap. So 105 scholarships, there's no limitation on scholarships, but there are limitations on rosters, because wrestling could have up to 30 scholarships. Whether they carry that or not is yet to be seen, but there definitely will be an increase from that 9.9 to something greater. For football, the conversation was, well, Penn State's going to have to make some roster cuts to get down to that 105, but there's that this happened fairly late. July 1st is when this goes into effect, in less than a month. So those roster cuts aren't going to happen now, because what is known as they're being grandfathered in. What is this? So just to kind of clarify, Steve, Penn State doesn't have to push anybody out at this point in time, correct?
Well, exactly, because you actually had a judge that showed a slice of wisdom
and cared. Yeah.
In other words, she looked at everybody in the room and said, how come nobody thought of this, essentially? Because it was brought forward in challenges. And she listened to the challenges. She didn't just sit there, punch in the card, yeah, okay, fine, and then punch out for the day. She listened to what people said. And she was the one that ended up being Job when it comes to this. She showed the wisdom to say, hey, look, I don't understand why these people can't be grandfathered. And I always love Ward Manuel, who, by the way, is the athletic director at Michigan. He says, look, I want the grant. I said, I want walk-ons. But he was explaining, he said, there's a cost involved. Well, you know what the cost involved is, for goodness sakes. It's about $20,000 per, right? Because the meal plan is a buffet. Okay, we can add in a few extra people, right? You're paying for your school. If you happen to be one of the 74 players traveling, you're taking up a spot on the plane that was going to be occupied by a scholarship player, so that doesn't cost anything. They double book on the road in terms of you're rooming with somebody else, so that doesn't cost anything. So I mean, they don't add any cost. So if you have 120 players, and say 8 of them happen to be senior walk-ons, you'll be down to 112 next year. And then eventually you'll get to 105. The SEC is going to go with 85 scholarship players and 20 walk-ons. Now, why are they going to do that? Because they're going to spread out the money among 85 players instead of spreading out the money among 105 players. Yeah. Right? So bigger pieces of the pie. So that's how they're going to do it in the SEC. You can go to 105. You can do it in such a way where you can do 85 full scholarships, you can do 105 full scholarships, or you can do 90 full scholarships and parse out the other ones that add up to maybe 100 instead of 105 because of partials. There's a lot of different ways to do it. I think the roster limit should have been 105 plus a 15-player practice squad, because I think in order to properly run a practice, 120 players are needed to properly run a practice. And that's why, for example, in women's basketball, they've had 15 scholarships for decades now. But nobody uses 15 scholarships. Why? They have a male practice squad. So they don't need all the scholarship players, and it's easier for them to manage the roster. In football, you don't have that. Yeah, your walk-ons are, along with players you're redshirting, they are your developmental squad. Okay, and I think to properly run a practice, you really need 120. 105 is the number that was picked, and I know why it was picked, because that happens to be the training camp number. You have to have 105 at training camp, and you're not allowed to expand the roster until you get to the first day of classes. That's the way the old rule used to be. So the 105 is going to be how you manage it. James Franklin showed a lot of wisdom as to how he did. He said, "Look, I'm not making any move until I'm told to make a move," right? As opposed to other schools that said, "Hey, look, just so you guys know, you're done."
Yeah.
Right? We have to get to 105. We have to do this now. Not realizing that she would do this. Now, whether they can call those players back, I think they can now. But I mean, that, the fact that James was smart enough to play the waiting game is going to benefit a lot of young people, because they get to keep their stay here at Penn State and play.
Well, the big debate isn't even centered around the scholarships, because with NIL, hey, everybody can still have their education taken care of to an extent if they attend Penn State or if everybody else is strategic. So there's a misconception about the House settlement, is that, oh, this is going to replace NIL. No, NIL is not going anywhere. So how is Penn State positioned? We're going to talk about that next here on Locked On Nittany Lions. And today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. You got to download the Gametime app, because buying tickets to your favorite events should not be stressful. You'll get killer last-minute deals, panoramic seat views, and no surprise fees. Gametime is a total game changer. So you have the NBA playoffs going on right now. You can get tickets to the NBA finals. You can also get tickets to Penn State sporting events. Penn State football game tickets are currently available on Gametime. So you have great ways to save money on those tickets. For example, there are zone deals where you can get 60% off in great sections. That's not the only benefit of Gametime. You get to see the exact seat view before you buy. There's no surprises. And I think that's the best feature overall, because if you go to a new venue, if you go to a stadium that you've never been to before, then you're guessing, okay, what's the best point of view? Gametime gives that to you up front. And with the Gametime guarantee, you'll know that you're getting the best deal. If you find a better price, same row, same section, they will credit you 110% of the difference. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create that account, redeem code LOCKEDONCollege, LOCKEDONCOLLEGE for $20 off. Download Gametime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. NIL is how we got here, between the collectives and the alleged pay for play across the board. I saw some reports that there were schools in the ACC, for example, that with the new clearinghouse initiative that's going to review anything that's 600 plus, that up to 70% of NIL agreements would not have been eligible. So This is what this is for. Penn State started off, objectively speaking, slow in the NIL sphere. It was brand new. I don't think that the university was necessarily caught off guard, but you definitely had to transition to the new wave of college football, where some schools were a little better positioned to do so. But now that Penn State is fully immersed in it and figuring out ways to adapt, they are competitive. So even though the House settlement's in place, you can pay money to the student athletes from the university, but NIL is not going anywhere. Steve, you mentioned it right out of the gate that you still need a collection of donations to remain competitive, and NIL is going to be a huge part of that. From what you're allowed to disclose, Steve, or what you know, where is Penn State actually tangibly positioned to compete with the other big schools that are going to be big spenders in college football specifically?
Well, I think for the most part, they're in good shape. You can always be better. That's why they've done the NIL events in Avalon. They've done the NIL event in Philadelphia, which was a big success. They've got one coming up in Pittsburgh, which I'm going to be at, which will bring in, just the fact I'm there is going to bring in nothing. It'll be the other people. But you have to keep pushing that forward. If you get complacent in your fundraising because people assume, well, okay, now the athletic department will pay. Well, where's the money coming from? I mean, where's it coming from? So, your donation base is going to be greater than ever. And again, there's a standard NIL. Hi, I'm Zach Seyko, pick name of car dealership. Mm-hmm. That's NIL. Those deals, according to Deloitte, when they made the presentation in Amelia Island, would have been approved. 90% of them would have been approved like that. That's standard old-fashioned NIL. 70% of the collective donations that you talked about earlier, as you pointed out correctly, Deloitte told the ACC athletic directors and coaches in Amelia Island would not have been approved, which means that's another lawsuit. Okay.
It's a great time to be a lawyer in college athletics right now.
It's a great time to be a lawyer anytime, okay? Unless you're an NCAA lawyer, because they're owed for life, but they are on retainer. So I think that more than ever, you're going to need donations, and your attendance has to stay high, everything, because you're going to need a stream of cash coming in, because it's not just a stream of cash coming in to keep you competitive, but you're going to need a stream of cash coming in because you don't want to be in a spot where you're transitioning other sports to club sports because you're coming up short financially. So you're going to have to be able to cover this. And if you want to compete for a national championship, look, it's just like, this is like professional sports now. Mm-hmm. Okay. I mean, the Yankees and the Dodgers are where they are, and the Tampa Bay Rays are where they are. Ask yourself why. Yeah. Okay. I mean, ask yourself why. And it's a common complaint. Why are the Pirates where they consistently are? Because the ownership won't take money and invest it. Well, as a university, through donations and through fiscal responsibility, you can then have the money to invest in personnel that can make a difference and can win yourself a national championship. You have to take the same approach the pros do now.
It's great for Penn State because they are financially equipped to do this. Again, the brand power, the resources that they already have. Pat Kraft wasted no time saying when the House settlement was in its early process that Penn State's going to be better because of this, and that the $20.5 million that it can allocate, it is going to be doable, and it could be more down the road. So this is where I want to bring it back to the overall outlook for college athletics. Is that, Steve, I can't help but think that this is going to create more of haves versus have-nots. Fortunately for Penn State as a university, it is a have. But when I think of how, for example, St. John's doesn't have a football program. So they're going to become this basketball powerhouse because they're going to devote most of their resources there. So that's an issue for Penn State basketball, which is a separate conversation. But if you're not in the Power Four, you don't have these powerhouse media rights deals, and you're a group of 5, group of 6, whatever they're calling it these days, you're not really going to have that great of a chance unless you are in one of these Power 2 and then the Big 12 and the ACC conferences. So that's the issue that I have, is it actually widens a little bit of the gap. There's more teams that can now get to a national title and be a contender year in and year out, but it also pushes everybody else away where now they have no chance.
Well, this is what you have in terms of external resources for Penn State. One, the Big Ten contract is the best in college sports.
By far.
Between Fox, NBC, CBS, it's the best. So each year, and it's a backloaded contract. So now some of the bigger money is starting to come in for everybody on a per school basis. Penn State was able to then take its contract on radio and also corporate sponsorships and so forth and shifted from Learfield to Playfly. Well, in the process, they doubled the rights fee when they did that, right? And when I mean double the rights fee per year, okay, I'm talking 8 figures per year, okay? All right? I mean, that's what, I'm not going to tell you the exact numbers, but I mean, it's 8 figures per year, and they doubled it. And so that's, and the timing of that could not have been any better for them. So, I mean, when you're looking at what they've been able to do with those numbers, plus you're going to get more from the college football playoff, because when the new college football playoff contract comes into play, everybody's going to get 2.5 to 3 times more.
You get a cut
at an individual cut as you received before. So that's about to go up. The one area that will go down slightly will be the NCAA basketball distribution because of the back pay issue from 2016 to September 17th of this year.
Yeah.
Right. Because of the back pay, 60% will come out of NCAA reserves, but the other 40% spread out over 10 years will come out of NCAA basketball distributions. Now, that's not really going to hurt a Big Ten or an SEC school, but it's going to hurt the Bucknells of the world because they rely on that one bid and they rely on the distribution. Getting less will hurt them. If you're an ACC school or a Big 12 school, you have a big problem here. Right? You have, because everybody, when they're doing their 5-year budget projection, did not have $20.5 million in their budget projection. And by the way, there's a 4% escalator every year in this. So by the time we get to the 10th year of this, it's going to be about $30 million, right? They also didn't have the extra scholarships in there. Right? You're talking about wrestling going from 9.9 to maybe Kale going with 20.
Yeah. Well,
that money 5 years ago wasn't in there. You would be budgeting for 9.9. Baseball, you'd be budgeting for 11.4 or 11.5 or whatever the number happened to be, right? I mean, so that's, those numbers weren't in there. That's another anywhere from $3 to $7 million more. So this is more than just $20.5 million. With the additional scholarships, that's another $3 to $7 million more that an athletic director has to come up with, right? That you weren't thinking about 3 to 5 years ago. So it's actually more dominoes. When you talk about fundraising, it's more dominoes than ever because everybody hears 20.5 million. No, it's like somewhere between 25 and 30 million you're going to have to come up with.
Penn State, best position to do this. And across the board, you're going to see football remain competitive at this, at the top, be able to go up against the elite teams. But basketball, wrestling, we're seeing allegedly with hockey, right? They're at least taking a step forward. So every team at Penn State is going to benefit, and Pat Kraft is the right person to continue to push this forward in this ever-changing landscape. Now, Steve, there was a report that surfaced. Pat Kraft denied it, but it's still something that we should address because Penn State fans were collectively upset with this. We're going to talk about private equity and what it would, the prospect of it, if Penn State were to opt into something like this. We're going to talk about that next here on Locked On Nittany Lions. It was a bombshell report from On3. It wasn't entirely correct. Pat Kraft issued a response to it, but we're going to talk about it. If this did happen down the road, what exactly would it mean? We want to talk about ever-changing landscape. The report in itself, Penn State and UCLA were allegedly the first two schools to join a private equity firm with a number of $500 million. So this is where NIL didn't go away. You can fund an athletic program. So the issue that everybody's going to have with it is that, okay, this is truly, you're getting into pay-for-play territory that people can buy university sports programs or fund them, and then you give them control. And what say do they have? Because they are funding them, even though they don't directly own them. Hey, we're paying your bills, so we get a say. Obviously, I don't like where that would go and the consequences that could come from it. Regardless, it's not a Penn State issue. It doesn't have to do with UCLA, just in general, because I've always seen the jokes about how, this corrupt business is going to fund this SEC team or this Big 12 team as a joke. But in reality, what is stopping them if, the courts say, well, this is acceptable? How can you compete with that? So, Steve, I feel like that is a rabbit hole that most people should not want to go down for the sake of college athletics.
Yeah, I mean, Penn State does have a relationship with Elevate, but that's about ticketing, and that was brought out last summer. All right, so I mean, is there a relationship there? Yes. All right, but it's for ticketing. right? And Penn State announced that last summer. Look, private equity is interesting because when you're sitting there and you see the numbers, wow, we could get pick number, right? So let's just say $1 billion. You can get $1 billion. Okay, I mean let's shoot big here. I can get $1 billion. The billion looks great; it's enticing. But when you are involved in any business operation and somebody puts their money into it, they want rate on return. And if they're looking for rate on return and they're not getting it, they then have two options, depending what the contract language is. They can pull out, or we're going to step in and we're going to start making decisions because we're not going to lose our investment. I think one of the things that you do not want to do in college sports is you do not want to lose control of your product, right? The people that run Penn State, for example, know their product, know how to market it, know how to sell it, right? And the bottom line, of course, they know how to win with it. I mean, this is one of the great times to be a part of Penn State. National championship women's volleyball, national championship in wrestling, Frozen Four in hockey, national semifinals in men's lacrosse, national semifinals in football, Elite Eight in women's soccer. This is one of the great times ever to be at Penn State. And so many other programs like baseball improving by the day. And so it's a great time to be here. And Pat Kraft knows that he has something special here. And that's where the stadium comes into play. The stadium is, what they're doing with the stadium, putting the $750 million into it to build all the luxury suites and all the actually conference center areas. They're going to be able to utilize that stadium so much more, right? I mean, more than ever before, which instead of having to rent out space to do something, now they're the ones renting it out to other people, right? And helping to pay for all of that. And the response has been great to it. So when you're managing your own product and you're invested in your own product, it's going to be exponentially better for you, despite the fact that the shiny object over here is saying, how about $4 billion? Wow, that shiny object is really interesting. I'd like to be attracted to the shiny object, but you have to sit back and you have to ask, what do you give up to get the shiny object? And I think that's always the question that you're going to ask. The Big 12 was thought to be going toward private equity, and even they backed off it. Many thought they would, pick a company. Hey, the All-State Big 12. Hey, great. All right. But even they backed off it, which I thought was interesting. The numbers sure are enticing, but you always have to ask, what do you give up to get the number?
Yeah, there's always the unintended consequences from it that you get because the first thing that came to my mind is that, yes, you now have people that aren't affiliated, hypothetically speaking, right? This was all an incorrect report for the most part from On3, Pat Kraft issued, but it's just the idea of it, because there was that collective, oh, this is bad, this is wrong, I don't want to go in this direction. This really goes against the idea of success with honor, which is what Penn State has held true to. And when you look at it, that's exactly what it would go against, is that people that have no connection with Penn State, that are worried about dollars in versus dollars out, what kind of control, what kind of say would they have? And then you are essentially the rights to control of the Penn State football team, the Penn State basketball team, any of the other varsity sports teams. I don't mean to lump them all together and dismiss them like that, but just for the sake of naming 31 varsity sports, so that's what you want, somebody that's not affiliated with Penn State saying that, oh, this team's not financially profitable, we need to cut them. That could be on the table.
Well, it's already on the table in some areas, because Ohio State has already taken their men's gymnastics program and they're transitioning them over to a club program. So when you are looking at the House settlement, so let's go back and circle back on that. Okay. As I mentioned, the ACC and the Big 12 coming up with $20.5 million, or potentially coming up with 25 to 30 million, including new scholarships that would be in there. Where are they coming up with that money? They don't have the TV deals or the radio deals to pull that off. Does that now mean that they will transition some sports to club teams? Does that mean that they will? I mean, because Indiana already has laid off 25 people in the athletic department. I mean, they've already done that because they were anticipating that they can't carry all these people and pay this money. So there is going to be a domino effect in that regard, and that's going to be a big question. There are 87 sports that the NCAA sponsors. Well, how many of those sports are going to be transitioned to club sports? Possibly. If people look at the budget and say, I just don't know if I can make ends meet, right? That's where now you get attracted by the shiny object again, right? Well, we can keep all these sports, and Stanford has 36. Ohio State now has gone from 34 to 33. Penn State has 31. Then you have Texas, which has 17. Okay. Like, they've never gone out. I mean, Alabama has 20. Right? Most SEC schools do not really have more than 21 or 22 sports. Clemson already took women's swimming and diving and already, like 3 years ago, eliminated the program. Iowa eliminated 4. Right. So this is like, that's the danger part of it. You're not going to be adding sports. I mean, I know there's been a big push, for example, across the country. Now's the time to add women's wrestling. Great sport. But I'm sorry, nobody's adding any sports. Okay? I mean, not right now, not until this settles down and you figure out exactly what your finances are over the next 5 years. There will be no ads by anybody along the way in that regard. The area you do worry about is, and athletic directors will fight this as hard as they can because they care. Okay? The NCAA may not care. Okay? The running joke.
That's how we got here, because they didn't care.
Right. The running joke that we've always had, Dick Girardi, Sean Morris, and it's all about the kids. All right. Well, at the NCAA level, no, it's not about the kids. They're a means to an end. Okay. Okay. At Penn State, Pat Kraft, James Franklin, Cale Sanderson, Mike Rose, they care about the kids. So they'll fight as hard as they can to make sure that all the programs can stay fully funded.
More chaos is on the horizon, but like I said, Penn State, how we started this conversation, they are in a position to sustain not only Wade, but be out in front, be better because of it. That's going to do it for this edition of Locked On Nittany Lions. My name is Zach Seyko, and I'm your host as always. He is the voice of Penn State football, Penn State men's basketball. Steve Jones joining me here on the show to talk about the business side of college athletics and what's ahead and what Penn State is going to do in the midst of all of it. Links to his work outside of Penn State football and Penn State basketball coverage will be down in the description. I encourage you to go check them out as he hosts a daily radio show Monday through Friday. Steve, thank you so much for the time here. Really appreciate you joining me on the show once again to talk about something that outside of Penn State football and Penn State basketball, but certainly relevant to the university.
Interesting times, Zach. Thanks so much.